Hey, it's POB, and today I'm going to break down this all noise engineering patch. Here we go. So let's get to dissecting this one. I'll start with the 5 voices, plus the sequencers, effects, and modulation controls. Let's start with the voices. The first voice is the BIA. We'll start with the clock that's being generated by Horologic Solum, which is sent to clock the numeric repetitor. I selected my main pattern, then sent it out to trigger the BIA. The BIA's out is sent to the Kith-Ruina distortion module, where I up the drive, here it is without, and I cranked the low end of the tone stack to make that thick kick even thicker. I also intercepted the BIA's trigger with the muted Jovis switch, so I can mute some of the triggers manually. Going through a switch module is much cleaner than trying to mute the audio itself on the mixer. The second voice is Incus. This is the most complex voice of the whole patch. I'm triggering Incus with Gamut Repetitor, with Incus set to impact mode with a slow attack and a shorter time. The Morph knob is set to square wave, and Temper is set to noon. To spice it up, I'm using Ponza Sonorum for envelopes, Yesterversio for delay, and Mimetic Digitalis to send a synced clock into that delay. Gamut receives a divided clock from Horologic Solum, then it's multed, with one going to channel 2 of the muted Jovis when I want to manually switch off the trigger, and the other goes to Ponza Sonorum, which creates a ramp-up envelope. I've also set Pons to LFO mode by holding down the hit button. This lets the envelope ramp up, then it goes into short LFO taps. You can hear those triplet-like hits by speeding up the LFO until you find that sweet spot. All that modulation goes into Incus's Alloy CV input and makes a huge difference in timbre. Here's Incus without the Alloy CV, and with. The other CV input I'm using is for time control, which is fed by Mimetic Digitalis. That step CV changes the decay time over a 16-step pattern. Without it, Incus would just be boring, but with it, it brings the voice to life. Here it is without time CV. and with. For a subtle effect, Incus is running through Raucha Legio, our stereo filter with wavefolding. I'm using Raucha's bypass input, which is turning off and on by another channel on Memetic Digitalis. I set that channel up as a gate sequencer with a high gate at steps 13 and 16. Here it is without the bypass gate. And now filtered. And finally, for delay, I've got Yester Versio on aux A of Zermixa. It stays in sync by using the top left trigger on Memetic Digitalis that goes into its tap input. On Yester, I've dialed in a high-pass tone, maxed out the chorus, and pulled the clock division down just under noon, with region all the way down. The third voice is Sync Legio, which is the melody. This stereo oscillator is set in fold mode, with a bit of chorusing going on. Electus Versio is the clocked reverb here on aux B. The sequencing is coming from the OpNed arpeggiator. I set OpNed to play 4 notes, which are a minor chord with a flat 6. It covers a 2-octave span, with the arpeggio descending in a zigzag pattern. OpNed is getting its trigger signal from one of the numeric repetitor channels. My favorite part of this patch is how I was able to create a vibrato feel to the melodic line. I molted the same trigger from the numeric repetitor to one of Quantus Trajecta's inputs. Quantus Trajecta is an envelope generator that has this unique ability to wub. So I set it up to create a wub. Then I sent that wub to Sync Legio's Morph CV input. Here it is without the wub. And with. Let's hear what we have so far. Now let's check out our fourth voice, the Bell Iteratasalia, our phase modulation oscillator. This setup is pretty simple. I've got the bell in taco mode with a short shape and a bit more for the time. The bell's trigger comes from channel 2 of the numeric repetitor, and the sequence is coming from gamut repetitor, our generative sequencer. If you listen closely, you'll notice the bell doesn't change pitch with every trigger. The pitch shifts every other beat, while the triggers are more rhythmic and dense, so you'll hear repeats of the same note from time to time. The generative sequence is created with gamut's octave spread set to 2, steps set to 7, and the down-up knob turned all the way down, with CV coming from the Memetic Digitalis to control the down-up range offset. The switches set the scale to minor, so the pitch is landing on different combinations of 3 minor chord tones. And of course, like Sync Legio, it's running through Electus Versio for some clocked reverb. I needed one last voice to give the patch some low end, so bring on Manus. Manus is running a trigger that I can control with Confundo Funkidos. I've only patched one side of Confundo, so the other side stays silent. Sliding back and forth between the two lets me bring triggers in and out. Now I'm going to be using stuff wrong, which involves our attenuators Lapsus Os and Sanctifero. By the way, you may have noticed the lap Sass is upside down. I flipped it so the sliders sit below the jacks, making it easier to perform. You can do that by changing the 4 switches on the back of the module. So the challenge is that I wanted a cinematic 2-note drop on Manus, one I could slide using a single fader. So I set the top of the fader to the root note and the bottom to 2 notes lower. To get that exact range, I used Sync to Pharaoh to measure and tune the voltage difference between the 2 notes. Then I nudged Sync to Pharaoh's attenuation until it landed perfectly.